Hello friends, I just wanted to make a video today explaining this rogue build that I've been playing for about a month now. It is super fast, super fun. It might be honestly one of the best leveling builds in the game, if not just for rogue. It is basically, if you're watching this video, you've probably seen Woody's build guide on the Flurry and Rapid Fire rogue combo, which is super strong and super fun to play. This is similar to that build, but it has a few key differences. And those key differences mainly revolve around not using Penitent Greaves so that you're able to get the max evade charges on your boots, which I'll go over, and then also using the Retribution aspect on your weapon preferably, which gives you a massive, if you have a max roll, 80% damage increase to stunned targets. You don't have to put this on your weapon, but I think it should go on the weapon. So the main differences between the build are, it's basically the same build, but you are way more focusing on the ability to be able to stun people with your flurry, which after you get your exploit glyph socketed, you can use advanced flurry, which stuns people for 2.5 seconds every time you evade through an enemy. So it's super, super strong. And with your max evade charges and the way that the kind of gameplay loop between dazing people with manglers aspect and then that feeds your evade charges, and then you can evade to stun people is super fun, super engaging, and super strong. So basically how this works is basically you take puncture with the 3 blades spreading vulnerable. The best option here just is the fastest core skill, and it's a marksman skill which plays into our tricks of the trade in the Paragon board, which I'll go over later. But you want to use puncture for sure, and then obviously you spec into rapid fire and flurry. Flurry, early game you want to use this vulnerable spread, but after you get the exploit glyph, you can switch over to this and really get the stun aspect of this build online. I want to put full points into rapid fire, and I take advanced rapid fire just because the critical strike damage is really important here, especially because you're evading all the time. But the improved rapid fire, the energy just really isn't a problem on this build, so you don't need that at all. For movement abilities, I use dash and shadow step, no surprise here. I was playing this build early on with concealment as my unstoppable source, but the cooldown is 16 seconds. It's just a little bit too long, and the shadow step is just a lot less of a cooldown, especially if you run this, which can reduce the cooldown even further. So pretty much anytime you need to get out of a situation like frozen mobs that are super overpowered, you can use your shadow step pretty much anytime you need it. Dash, you just put 1 point in it. I have 4 here because I got rings on my boots, but super good tool. If you ever do run out of evade charges, you can just dash away to safety. I like to use the methodical dash because we're crowd controlling everything, so your charge cooldown just goes really, really low, depending on how many people you're crowd controlling. You could use Discipline Dash, but I just don't think it's necessary. Don't use any ultimates. Shadow Imbuement, kind of the bread and butter of the build. You can use other ones if you want. The build definitely works with the other ones, but I just think the explosions from Shadow Imbuement are cool and really powerful. I don't actually put a point into either of these. I don't think it's really necessary. No ultimates. And for the key passive, I like to use close quarters combat. I was using momentum since you're stunning and dazing all the time. This is really good, but the damage reduction I don't think is too necessary. The build's already tanky, especially with the flurry healing you every time you damage a vulnerable or crowd controlled enemy. Super strong, so it's really, really tanky. That with the siphoning strikes. But yeah, I like close quarters combat better because you're using puncture and flurry a lot, so you're constantly at that 20% attack speed bonus. And you deal 30% increased damage to crowd control targets, which stunned, dazed. All your enemies are always stunned and dazed pretty much, so it's really strong. Momentum, the movement speed, if you have a lot of movement speed already, is kind of redundant, and then the energy regeneration isn't too much of a problem. So you could use either of these, but I like close quarters combat. The main thing about the build here, though, is using this rapid Gambits at full 3 out of 3, so your evade cooldown is reduced by 1.5 seconds anytime you daze somebody, which using the manglers aspect, you're dazing quite a bit, even without any investment into lucky hit chance on your stats. So basically the way this build works is you are evading through an enemy and then proccing your flurry to be able to stun everyone you hit. And then your manglers is also proccing and dazing any enemy that isn't stunned. and usually they get dazed and then stunned. So the daze is constantly funneling into your rapid gambits, which is further reducing your evade cooldown. And you have 4 charges of evade since you're not using Penitent. So the dazes are refunding your evades, allowing you to just evade over and over and over again and continually stun people with your flurry. And you might be wondering, if you put Retribution on your weapon, where do you put your Edge Masters? Because we're definitely still using Edge Masters here. I opted to put it on my neck because it only goes down from 40% to 30%, which isn't a huge deal. Still very strong there. And I think 10% loss on the Edge Masters versus an extra, if you have a max roll, 40% damage to stunned enemies is super strong here, especially because you're stunning pretty much everybody. For the rest of the aspects, it's pretty standard. For your defensives, I would definitely run Disobedience and Might. You could replace Might with cheats, but I don't think the movement speed is that necessary, and I just think Might is pretty good overall. Like, I think it's just a little bit more consistent. You can run 3 defensive aspects, but especially for running dungeons that are, the standard 50 levels under your level, you have no problem at all with defensives. I was running 3. I was running Umbrus with the points into the movement speed on the Dark Shroud, but I decided to opt to stop using Umbrus entirely, take the points out of here, and I'd have no problems at all surviving. So instead, I opted to put my Shared Misery on my helmet, which at a max roll has a 50% chance to spread your crowd control to everybody else, or to another target, which when you're hitting 4 or 5 targets with daze and stun, oftentimes the whole screen ends up dazed or stunned. So it's super strong to be able to just, kind of immobilize an entire pack right with 1 flurry. So that's strong. Then another bread and butter aspect of this build is, again, the manglers aspect. You definitely want to have this on here somewhere. The daze is kind of the main generator for your evade charges, which then allows you to evade all the time, which then allows you to stun all the time with flurry. And then for the rest of it, I would use expectant with a combo point build. That's kind of expected. Attacking enemies with base skill increases your core skills, which kind of plays counterintuitively if you have a condemnation, which procs you to be able to have just 3 combo points right off the rip, which kind of doesn't allow you to stack your expectant if you're playing optimally. But what I've noticed with this build is you kill things so fast with your Retribution that oftentimes I just kill things without any combo points at all, and I find it actually slows you down a little bit more to be constantly building your combo points to 3 instead of just doing a finisher at 1 or 2. So I think once I get condemnation, which unfortunately I haven't gotten one, about 180 hours in, no condemnation, not very happy about that. But even without it, the build is so strong, and it's nice to be able to have 2 swords for your weapon mastery passive. But the what I've noticed is you kind of forget about your combo points. You don't, especially if you have condemnation. Sometimes you're going to be proccing the 3, so you're gonna have to stack it, and then you're not really using your expectant, but you're not wasting your condemnation proc, and vice versa. So I kind of just forget about my combo points. If I'm killing a large enemy or something, I'll stack it all the way up to 3, but usually it's only 1 or 2, and that's more than enough to get the job done. I've been clearing nightmare dungeons, with mobs 3 level higher than me, like in 2 minutes, sometimes 3 minutes, 5 minutes. So it's really not that important. And I think it speeds up the run to not always be trying to fully max out your combo points. Edge Masters, like I said, and then for the rest, obviously you want to use Encircling Blades, kind of is required for any flurry build. The rest of them, you want to use the attack speed bonuses. I like the basic skill attack speed from Rapid. I like the accelerating. These are pretty standard, especially if you've seen Woody's build guide. And then on top of that, I have been experimenting with this Ravenous aspect, which, like I said, I'm not always building my combo points all the way up, and I'm using Flurry and Rapid Fire a lot more. So it kind of got me into a little bit of a problem, especially using close quarters combat with having a little bit of energy issues, not fully at maximizing my Edge Masters all the time. So I use Ravenous on my ring, just kind of experimenting with it. You don't need to have it. You're kind of sacrificing another offensive aspect. I think I'd probably put Vengeful. I was running Vengeful on here and then Expectant on my ring, but this Ravenous is really good for it basically keeps me topped up on energy all the time. I was using Umbral a little bit. It just didn't seem as good as Ravenous, so I would definitely try that out. As far as the Paragon board, it's pretty similar to Woody's build. However, one key difference, so he has two builds, the one for Penitent and one without Penitent. We're not using Penitent here to get the max evade charges on our boots, but we still want to use most of the Paragon board for the Penitent build because mainly due to this glyph of control here that increases, as you can see, for me, 106% damage to crowd control enemies, which is super important. This can get even higher than this. Definitely want to use that there. Then pretty standard for the rest of it here, you have combat. It's really good to put diminish here because it gives the 100% or more bonus to this rare node focus, which gives you a lot more damage to elites, which is super powerful. You want to use exploit, very important, spending that vulnerable since you're not using your flurry spreader anymore. You have turf over here. You can do a little bit of different things here, but so far this Paragon board seems to be working out pretty well for this build. You take the exploit weakness for more vulnerable damage, and you take the tricks of the trade. So every time you're using, if you're just playing the build normally, your puncture is going to proc a 25% extra on your flurry. It doesn't work too much for rapid fire. You can kind of game it with using since Shadow Step is a cutthroat ability. You can use that to then proc tricks of the trade on your rapid fire when you're fighting bosses, which is kind of nice, but you don't have to do that. Obviously using combo points. And yeah, so basically the main gameplay loop, like I said, is you're just evading all the time and then stunning everybody all the time. And then when you have shared misery, oftentimes what you'll notice is that if you just hit 4 or 5 targets with the flurry, the amount of stuns from your evade charge and then also dazes from the manglers spreads to pretty much every other enemy on the screen. So you're usually just immobilizing entire screens of mobs and killing them before they have a chance to do anything. So super nice. For stats on the gear, it's pretty standard stuff for your helmet, chest, and boots. You just want to go for defensive stats. My gear is pretty cracked right now. I moved to tier 4 at like level 56, so I've had a lot of time to get these ancestral items in tier 4, but maximum life. On the helmet side of things, you want attack speed, you want armor, maximum life. This is pretty dang good helmet here. And then on your other defensive slots, you want damage, any type of damage reduction, maximum life, armor, that kind of stuff. I like the close and distant combo with the armor and the maximum life. On your gauntlets, these are pretty good gauntlets. You really want to have your ranks of rapid fire and ranks of flurry. I've tried it with gloves that just have one or the other, and in both situations, the other skill just kind of feels a little weak. So you want to have definitely both of those over everything else. Attack speed and crit chance are also really good to have on the gloves. Again, this build functions around attack speed, so having that there is really nice. On the boots, again, you want to prioritize having the max evade charges. Ever since I got my first boot with extra evade charges, I never wanted to go back to only having one. So anytime I get boots that don't have a max evade, I just instantly vendor them. This is the main reason why I didn't want to use Penitent and how I kind of learned to play this build and how it synergizes so well because I have all these max evade charges. Other than that, you want movement speed. Right now my character has like 164% base movement speed, which kind of feels like it's breaking the game. It's pretty crazy. I learned from Asmongold that anytime a game allows you to do something that you don't feel like you should be able to do is a good thing. And having this much movement speed is really like something that does that. So it's really fun to have all that movement speed. And again, you can get movement speed on your boots. I have 24% there, and movement speed on your neck. And there's another 24%. Pretty high rolls. Speaking of the neck, you definitely want to have the weapon mastery passive. Being a mainly melee focused build here, weapon mastery is super strong, especially with 2 swords. If you don't have the condemnation, and even still, if you have the condemnation, it's strong. You can have malice ranks. It's not too bad with the extra vulnerable, but the weapon mastery is super strong. Other than that, movement speed, cooldown reduction, the slow duration reduction isn't great, but working with what I got here. For the rings, standard stuff for your attack stuff, vulnerable, crit chance, crit dam, core skill, any other type of damage. Dazed is all right. These weapons aren't perfect here, but pretty good. On this, I like to definitely run dexterity on your crossbow, just a big chunk of dexterity, and your dexterity is a little low if you don't have that there. Core skill, my basic skill isn't the best. I have a perfect roll Retribution. I'm just waiting to put it on a better crossbow. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the stats here. You can pretty much follow any rogue guide. They all function pretty similar, barring in mind if you're not using any traps, which this build doesn't. So this build is actually like really, really strong. It's really tanky with the Flurry heal and the Siphoning Strikes heal. It's really fast with all the movement speed you're getting and all the attack speed you're getting from Flurry. I'm sure you know, you've probably seen the Moody video. It's really good at AoE. The Rapid Fire is really good at killing elites and bosses really fast. But then I think this build actually takes it up a notch with just having this massive amount of damage to your stun targets, and then without Penitent being able to just evade constantly. Like most of the time in big packs, my this talent that reduces your Rapid Gambits, that reduces your evade cooldown every time you daze by 1.5 seconds if you have it maxed out. I've tried playing it at 2 out of 3, but it feels a little bit better at the 3 out of 3. It's just so strong. You have so much evade. In most packs, I'm evading constantly, and I'm still always at 4 stacks pretty much of evade. So you're just evading all the time. You can get out of damage. You can get out of difficult situations all the time. If you can't use evade to get out, you have your dash, you have your shadow step. Super strong. And another really good thing about this build is that it's really good to level from 50 to 100 once you get your exploit glyph and you can spec into the actual stunning aspect of it all. But before that, you can still run the Flurry ability that if you don't have your exploit glyph yet, say you're like before level 50, this build's also really, really good. That's kind of one of the boons to me is what makes it so much of a fast leveling build is you can kind of run the same build all the way from 1 to level 100. Before you get exploit, you just run this to where your Flurry just instantly spreads all your vulnerable from your puncture to everybody else. Super strong. And the build comes online right at level 15. Well, not fully online, but functionally online right at level 15, because the dungeon that you have to do to get your rogue quest line to get your combo points, which your combo points is the first thing that you get right at level 15. That's what you use in the build. And on top of that, the dungeon that you do to get that is Forsaken Quarry, which nicely is the dungeon that you have to get your Encircling Blades legendary for your Flurry. So right at level 15, you have your good Flurry, you have your combo points. The build does really awesome all the way up to 50. And as soon as you get the exploit glyph online and you get the vulnerable spread without the Flurry thing, you can spec into the stun, put your Retribution on your weapon, and just melt entire packs pretty much infinitely with infinite stun, infinite evade, infinite daze from manglers. It's super strong. And even without specking into lucky hit at all, I have 1 lucky hit and I don't even want it on this ring. It doesn't really seem to be a problem lucky hit wise. So you don't need to have that at all. There's a few tips and tricks that I think I've kind of learned through playing this build that might not be immediately apparent when you start playing it. So the first thing is that when you want to proc your stun through evading through an enemy, you don't have, like, at first I thought you had to evade through the enemy that you want to stun. That's not the case at all. You actually can just evade through like a straggling mob before the pack and then run to the pack, and then the stun will still work on all the mobs there. So you can just kind of proc your evade preemptively through a mob and then run to the pack and then flurry them, stun them instantly. And that's another one of the tricks, is that sometimes, especially with like cold mobs that are super overpowered right now, what you want to do is, like, instead of building the combo points up to 3, you can just evade through a mob, go into the pack, and then instead of building my combo points, which you can build your combo points before you get to the pack, but I think it's faster just immediately dash in, and then instead of building your combo points up, just flurry instantly, and that's going to proc the stun, and everything's stunned for 2.5 seconds. Then I can freely build my combo points. The next flurry is definitely going to kill everything pretty much. So that's one thing. And then once I got the hang of this, I was just like evading all the time and stunning all the time, which, if you don't know, there's like an internal cooldown kind of diminishing returns type thing with the stun on the enemies. So if you stun them too many times, they're going to become unstoppable. And that lasts for a few seconds, and then you can stun them again. But what you want to do is like stun them one time and then do your damage and don't evade through and then stun again, which you can just continually doing it. especially with how much daze recharge on your evade you're getting. But what I like to do is just stun them once and then not proc the stun again until I have to, because you have a full 2.5 seconds of stun. Then once that's over, then you can evade again and then stun them again. And one thing that's actually bad about this build is that on some of the nightmare keys, there's these affixes, right? I'm sure you know that most of them are negative, but then there's the one that's green that's like supposed to be positive, right? I don't have one of the keys right now that I'm talking about, but it's called nudging evade, and it's supposed to be one of the positive effects to the key. Basically, what happens is when you evade, it's going to push back all the enemies around you. So it's supposed to be a good thing, but it ends up being a terrible thing for this build because every time you try to evade through an enemy, it just pushes them further away from you. So you actually are pretty much bricked at that point. It still does decent damage, but you can't proc your stun pretty much ever when you're doing the key with nudging evade. So I pretty much just instantly salvage those ones. It's supposed to be good for you, but it ends up being really bad for this build. So it's also really fun to play on controller. I'm sure it's just as good as on mouse and keyboard, but with all the evading and stuff like that, just it's super fun and engaging to play on controller, and it really works well. Even with rapid fire and shadow step being kind of weird on controller, with shadow step you kind of just hit it and hope for the best. You can't really aim it anywhere, so you do get into trouble with that sometimes, but you can work around it. And with rapid fire, usually you just want to be right up in their face, blast them anyway. So it's a really fun build, really engaging to play. I think it's super fast, super awesome. You can level really fast from 1 to 50, 50 to 100, all with pretty much the same build. It really comes online once you get that exploit glyph. And with season 1 just around the corner, people are going to be wanting to level fast. I think this is maybe one of the best leveling builds in the entire game, especially for Rogue. And I think you should give it a try. So if you like this video, I really appreciate you. Give me a subscribe, give me a thumbs up. I want to make more content like this. I'm going to be covering season 1, covering some things I like about the game, don't like about the game, want to see change, things like that. So hope you liked the video. Hope you have a good day, and thanks for watching.